Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Welcome to the Jesse Blake Sports Report. Whether this is your first time here or your last time here or somewhere in between, I appreciate that you're here right now today so that we can discuss Jacob Trouba hitting Trent Frederic in the head with his stick. On Saturday, the New York Rangers played the Boston Bruins, and at 2:20 of the second period, in front of the Rangers' goal, Trent Frederic and Jacob Trouba were battling. They're battling each other for position and for the puck, and they were getting into it. And amongst that play, Jacob Trouba swung and he hit his stick in the head of Trent Frederic. The video is vicious. It does not paint the incident in a good light, but the longer clip of the video, you see that while they're battling, Frederic is tied up within Trouba, and Trouba's stick kind of gets stuck with Frederic, who's grabbing onto it, and Trouba swings it, and it doesn't look like Trouba's kind of swinging to hit Frederic in the head. It looks like Trouba is either swinging to hit Frederic in the side of the leg or the body, or just try and get his stick loose from Frederic. But the way it ends up is Trouba swings and he hits his stick, and his stick swings and it hits Trent Frederic in the head. First things first with this incident, before we get into the NHL disciplining Trouba and if it should have been a suspension and all that fun stuff and Trouba's history, and that's what we're going to get into in this podcast. But before we do any of that, the most important thing about this play, on the ice, while this is happening, there is an NHL referee who is employed to be an NHL referee and call penalties or not call penalties against hockey teams in the National Hockey League. He is standing about 3 feet away from Jacob Trouba, swinging his stick and hitting Trent Frederic in the head. That play on the ice was not called high sticking. The most egregious thing in my mind out of this is not the fine that he received and not the lack of suspension, but we will talk about that. Is the referee standing there during the game and seeing this happen from me to the camera right there and not calling a penalty? Why does he have a job? What do referees do? And later in this game, there was a pretty ticky-tack high sticking as well called against Boston, but that's besides the point, because the referee is standing there and he decides to call nothing on the play. I'm just at a loss for NHL officiating at this point, and I'm so confused by what they are there to do, because that referee was not doing his job. Because at the very least, if you don't think it's a suspension, if you do think it's a suspension, well, there's two sides of that coin. At the very least, it is high sticking, and it was not called high sticking on the ice. Let's get into the fine. The NHL Department of Player Safety decided to give Trouba a $5,000 fine for this incident. There's been a ton of back and forth about this online, and a lot of people are comparing it to incidents of the past. I've seen some comparisons to the Marty McSorley, Donald Brashear incident, where Marty McSorley swung his stick and hit Donald Brashear in the head, and it was a vicious injury that happened to Brashear, and that ended up being a 23-game suspension because of that incident. And I see a lot of comparisons to other things, other stick swinging incidents, but what needs to be established here is that the NHL does not use other suspensions as precedent. So whether things look similar to incidents of the past, which I don't think this is, Donald Brashear and Marty McSorley, like I don't think it is that. But if you are saying it's that, if you are of that mind, your expectations of the NHL can't be that it looks at it like that, because the way the NHL disciplines, and we've learned this by the way that they run their Department of Player Safety, every incident, unless the player has a direct history of suspensions on their resume within the last couple of years, every single incident works inside of a vacuum. All of these plays, you have to look at them as a one of one and then assess discipline from there. There is no precedent from the Department of Player Safety. And that is a huge problem with the way the NHL runs it, because there's nothing in the rule book that says, if you do this, you receive this. everything must be adjudicated on a play-to-play basis. So when you have scary situations where guys have suspension-worthy actions, you don't know what the NHL is going to say at that moment. And that is a problem with the way the league is run. It is how the collective bargaining agreement has been written. The players have agreed to this type of discipline. And when we try and assess whether or not this should have been a suspension for Jacob Trouba, and it was not, you received a $5,000 fine from the Department of Player Safety. You have to look at the incident as a vacuum if you want to look at it like the NHL, because they've set up their rules so that everything exists within it of itself, and everything that has happened in the history of the NHL has no precedence on what they will hand down in terms of discipline to players. And the discipline that Jacob Trouba received today of a $5,000 fine is a little light. You are responsible for your stick in the National Hockey League. Whether you accidentally or on purpose commit an infraction with your stick, you are responsible for it. So the way this looked on first glance, with the first 2-second clip that runs, and it just looks like a swing of Trouba and he hits Trent Frederic in the head. And then when it looks like a little bit better, because you take a step back and you look at the 20-second clip of them battling and Trent Frederic getting his arm in there, and it looks like Trouba's just trying to pull away and he's swinging, but he's not intentionally trying to hit him in the head. The way that looks is a little better, but it does not excuse the actions, because even though the NHL says past actions do not have any bearing on future suspensions, what they do admit is that you are in charge of your stick. And if you do something accidentally illegal with your stick, it is still a penalty. It can still be a fine. It can still be a suspension. And in this incident, we have the Department of Player Safety saying, okay, Trent Frederic wasn't injured. The referee didn't think it was a penalty. Let's give him a fine instead of a suspension. But in actuality, I don't see how you are in charge of discipline in the NHL and you say you must have control of your stick. And Jacob Trouba, in this instance, accidentally does the most egregious thing that you can do with your stick, and that is hit a player in the head. And you still say that there is no major discipline for that is not at least a 2-game suspension. It should have been in that ballpark. It shouldn't have been 23 games. It shouldn't have been 10 games, but it should have been 1, 2, or 3. And I think even the New York Rangers fans, and I think Trouba would be able to live with that, because the NHL does mandate you are in control of your stick. If you accidentally do something illegal with it, you will be disciplined for that. Trent Frederic escaping with 0 injury, being able to play, not selling the call in any single way, just standing there and just being the tough guy he is, definitely didn't help the case. Because I think George Peros definitely looks at it and says, Trent Frederic, like, nothing really happened to him. And we're taking that into account here. And if he didn't hurt him, then it's not that bad. And that is a poor way to run your league. And once again, we're a broken record here, but the way the National Hockey League has set up their rules is a poor way to run their league. You need precedents to matter. You need the rules to be consistent. You need referees to call things on the ice. And consistently, time and time again, NHL fans like you and me are left confused by what the rules are about what is allowed and isn't allowed and what will and not get called. And that is a terrible way to run your professional hockey league. And we need better from the NHL top down in disciplining their players and calling infractions on the ice. That is it for me today. Thank you for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be watching or listening to this podcast right now. And I appreciate you for that. I will see you again on Thursday. Good night from Toronto.
And that is how it's done.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Jesse Blake, the guy that likes to hear his name twice in one sentence. Sure, I know him. No, he doesn't have an ego at all.